Yes, wow. I do have the pleasure of introducing Anupama Kundoo today, joining us from Berlin. And we met a long time ago. And I have to admit that already then I was not only fascinated by your work and how you operate, but I was also very impressed by your humor and your holistic attitude towards architecture and our built environment. And I'm not just saying that because here today you're here. I really felt that at that time. So it's wonderful that you are here today, especially during this strange time of still all of us being in this COVID limbo. This also goes for all of our guests that you all made it here. And you're sharing your knowledge with us, with the students and with us. And today you will share your work as the others have. A few words also sort of about your Werdegang. Anupama graduated from University of Mumbai in 1989 and received her PhD degree from the TU Berlin in 2008. Her research-oriented practice has generated people-centric architecture based on spatial and material research for low environmental impact while being socioeconomically beneficial. Her body of work was recently also this year in May 21 shown as a solo show called Taking Time. That's such a great title, by the way, at the Louisiana Museum of Modern Arts in Denmark. Anupama has taught at several schools. She taught architecture and urban management at various international universities, strengthening her expertise in rapid urbanization and climate change related to development issues. And she was a visiting professor at Yale University in spring of 2020. She's currently a professor at the Potsdam School of Architecture in Germany. Anupama has actually recently is a recipient of the Auguste Perret Prize of 2021 and is this year's winner of the prestigious RIBA Charles Jencks Award. Actually, just I think 4 weeks ago, no, it was announced. And this award is a recognition of significant contribution to the theory and practice of architecture simultaneously. So well deserved and big congrats again. I'd like to finish this short introduction, since your work will talk for itself, by mentioning an extract of the jury about Anupama's body of work, which very much also applies to our present and future constructions or constructives that we're discussing today. So I will quote, motivated by her experience of the problems of rapid urbanization and implemented in experimental buildings, Anupama has refined a strong political and conceptual theory of her practice. This theory is defined by ad hoc material experimentation and on-site local construction collaboration. Her work points to urgent methodologies for sustainable practices, everywhere. So that's really also is what we're discussing today. So I'm very excited to hear your lecture, Rethinking Materiality in the Age of Climate Change.
Thank you all for having me here. And thank you, Shadi, for this introduction. I'm under pressure because she's talked about my sense of humor. So I'm under pressure to be funny, but I'm going to resist that for the moment and want to be taken serious as well. So when I talk about rethinking materiality, I want to talk about materiality from the perspective of the non-material things. I have, my practice is 30 years old, and the first decade was very much just being hands-on, being on the site, but like you also spoke, I'm also a very old school kind of architect, mostly drawing, even though people see the experimentation and think it's all about, a different process. But actually, I think the classic process that's ancient, that architects have been taught to think with their hands while in the drawing. Drawing is a way of thinking, and that has been also my approach. But the first decade, I had complemented that kind of approach with rethinking materiality without calling it that. It's just because I wasn't blindly applying over standardized materials that were being sold through catalogs, but thinking for myself. And it can be seen as alternative only if we assume that the industrialization history of the recent years, if we assume that is the mainstream thing, then it looks alternative. Over the years, I realized that actually it's just a continuation, an evolution of what our ancestors have done, but we are responding to current problems with furthering our knowledge and research. So the second decade, I was more or less more into teaching and trying to formulate some of the theories. And in the third one, I have been trying to see how we really communicate this and where our profession needs to maybe enter into interdisciplinary processes. I am very interested in what anthropologists think, what economists think, instead of stumbling in a lot of panel discussions and thinking that really I don't know how this is going to scale up or how to compare it with normal, what is called economical approaches, just because something is mainstream and something is not. And so those, in recent years, I have been working much more with material manufacturers and other people who are producing buildings and using huge investments in our times. And for the architect to not become completely passive in front of developers who are actually the architects in today's time. If you honestly face, we feel like when we play with the Lego, ready-made Lego kit, which allows the child to build a specific type of car, but the child thinks he has invented that. And similarly, a lot of architects are perhaps only assembling those ready kits from the material catalogs, and someone else is the architect there behind, whom you invisibly don't see, just like the old people who played with the original Lego and the next generation. I grew up in India, we didn't have also Lego. We didn't have also the rectangular block, you know? So I will just now explain a little bit what I mean about time as a resource. While I was talking about materiality, I questioned the human resource, not only natural resource, how we spend our life, how we spend our time, and noticing that the human time and how we are actively engaged or in a hurry, rushing about, trying to be efficient and all of those things, putting the human time, acknowledging that as a primary resource. And if that is spent well, then I think natural resources will be also spent well. That is the theory which the RIBA has acknowledged, I feel. So I will just walk you through that. I want to start by saying that I think architecture is the stage on which all human stories are lived out. So for me, architecture is just in the background, and in today's times of renderings and a certain kind of marketing, sometimes we underestimate the spatial experience and not how it looks as an object. The architecture looks as an object, where once the stage was constructed by everyone, the stage today is almost exclusively constructed by professionals, virtually all of them, all of whom specialize in one trade or the other. The growing economically motivated separation between professional builders on the one hand and users of the built environment on the other is socially and environmentally destabilizing. Ordinary human beings are losing their ability to participate in the construction of society's largest undertaking, the built environment. That loss is leading to a slow erosion of human skill, social and physical engagement, and individuality. I come from the current situation, which is like this. I grew up in Bombay, and this has been our heritage. And, the material itself was whatever was abundant around you, and the skill and the time people invested. If it was used for a house, it was used more simply, but for a temple with more craft, and the richness was in the way the human engaged with the material. What was luxury was cultivating the eye, cultivating the mind. It was all those things that you cannot check in a tick off in a green rating system. So everything that is not possible to measure easily, like the beauty, health, well-being, sense of psychological comfort, and so on, happiness, all those get entirely left out of the equation, and people are anxiously measuring what can be measured. And alongside, we have this landscape, and this is where I grew up, So a lot of my work began from realizing how this kind of, if what is considered to be progressive in mainstream industrialized societies, and if we want to take everything further, every question today also, a lot of people ask, how are you going, this is clever, but how are you going to scale this up? If you're a small practice, I used to be asked that all the time. And I realized that that kind of scaling up comes at this cost, that there will be a elite section who will be able to afford the matchbox, which, because everyone has it, you have to think that is the norm, and you have to start liking the thing you actually didn't like. You have to start liking it because it costs a lot of money, which you're going to pay the rest of your life. You'll pay it off. By the time you're dead, it's going to be almost by then yours. And then the others who cannot afford this will have no house at all. So these are questions that made me think, because India and China, we are 1/3 of the world's population, and Africa, South America, and all the rest, all the non-Eurocentric people, which are the bulk of the population, they cannot have the same rate of production and consumption at the high speed at which it is being delivered. This is a big question mark. And instead of thinking like your practice, instead of thinking why you are alternative in this context, if you look at the global context, I think these are going to become the norm now. So it's very important for me to see it from that point of view. There is also, alongside that, the fact that high embodied energy materials like reinforced cement, concrete, aluminium, I don't like the idea of judging the material as good and bad, as if sustainability were a religion. I think there are places where you need to use more energy, but there are areas, and just because you know how to do it, it doesn't mean that every park bench needs to be built that way. Just because we already have this material, this is the new standard. So there's a huge loss of knowledge over one generation, and now two, through the industrialization, where concrete, etc., have become the vernacular material, and bricks, even in a country like India or Australia and wherever I've traveled, are now being only permitted by the man-made codes to be only used, not even load-bearing. They are become, I don't know what Louis Kahn would say, what a brick wants to be. Definitely, I'm saving a joke here because it's recorded, that the brick wants to be laid. But the point is, the brick, actually, because it is composite, it's a composite thing, and through the cement, the brick transcends the brickness, and instead you have a system where our codes are more serious than the human laws, are taken more serious than the natural laws of gravity, with whose knowledge humans' understanding of the natural laws allowed us to build very huge, big cathedrals and all kinds of big spans, tall buildings, all sorts of things, Then came the man-made laws and the codes, and we somehow in this generation tend to mix those laws up. We submit a lot to the man-made laws, which we can easily change and question. So here is one of the very perplexing thing, why bricks are now suddenly used as fillers all over the world inside concrete load bearing. There are seismic and other concerns that found their way into our codes, but I would like to question all that. But anyway, with these kind of concerns, when I graduated from as an architect, I immediately started my practice. And I had this kind of question, what's the point of doing efficiently things that need not be done at all? I used to think, what is the big idea of rushing about? And because the new industrialized economy tells us that time is money. So every saved hour is better. But actually, what are we doing with that extra time? Are we doing something better? Are we happier? That was a question. And then I realized that I actually want to proactively spend the time. Time is not a resource to be saved. Life, all our human resources, our intelligence, our care, our love, our time, memory, muscle, whatever it is, these are all resources, and these are endless, infinite. And let's eagerly spend it and have a nice life, and also have nice byproducts of beautiful buildings, etc. So I've put together 10 strategies, 10 or 12, I forgot, 12, I think, to just summarize some strategies that where the rethinking of material has to do with how humans engage with the material. So the first one is obvious, but still not applied, that material is best treated as a local matter. That what is abundant around you should make more sense to use that thing. If there's more labor, you use the labor. If there is some skill, you use the skill. If you have fetishes about where the marble should come from and so on, which we have afforded to have, and we know what kind of consequences we had with that. I think, therefore, I think we need to open our eyes and see what is immediately around us. And what my way of discovering that, even though it's obvious, is that I left Bombay and I started living in a small place called Auroville, which was a planned city, but it was just in the middle of nowhere. So I used to take my motorbike and explore, and I started realizing all materials actually come from the ground. They come from the earth. Then there are materials you can directly use, which require no process, only maybe transported by humans or by bullock cart or by cars and vans. But then there are manufactured materials, including brick. In the initial years, manufactured materials use less energy. And as we go along, basically manufactured materials also come from the earth, but a whole lot of energy goes into making them, and a lot of byproducts come out of the process. Some are polluting, many are polluting, and then there is the CO2 thing. So, but I started looking at traditional material manufacture and understand that our scope, if you don't want to directly begin with the catalog or the Lego, manual for architecture, we would then need to look from scratch what happens with material sourcing. And I realized that in my neighborhood, in my area, and then I discovered in every area, that humans sourced materials and in a way that all the processes were deeply linked with the territory. Like for bricks to be fired, people would grow this casuarina, which is a relatively straight growing branch, and that was used for scaffolding. And the thinnings, which they cut off every few months, were used for firing those brick kilns. And the brick kilns were stacks of there was no kiln where you fired it. The brick stack was the kiln, and when you finished firing it, you dismantled it, you plastered it, and in the season, they were rice farmers and so on. When they weren't looking at their plantations, that is when the monsoon cycle matched with the collection of silt and when the bricks were made, etc. So I noticed that the making of the sourcing of materials or the manufacturing of materials, whether it is brick or whether it's limestone, it involved human settlements whose activities were naturally wrapped around the sourcing of it. And it was not an isolated activity. Work was not an 8-hour thing. I mean, the agriculture was happening in some season, this was happening. So if you stop prescribing this type of cements or mortars or lime or local bricks, if you take one thing out of the equation, it affects the economy also of the agriculture. So I started realizing that material sourcing is a very, very deeply embedded thing in the territory, if you don't consider the big industrialized way of sourcing materials which are in the machine scale. And so I started producing projects literally from what was on the site. As an example, like even the sourcing of granite stone in India was still being done by hand. You could see the impact. You see how this quarry looks compared to how a machine quarried thing looks. And they still intelligently split those stones with little effort and a lot of cleverness. And I started using these kind of hand sculpted, materials to produce contemporary interiors. And I was trying to make sure that more of the money fed the local economy, and the skills that were available would not be immediately lost, because those people are struggling with their livelihood against the urbanization trends. So I wanted to promote the handcrafted, but I mean, there's a lot of engineering, like for instance, to make the stone be seen with new eyes, this kind of sculpture, like these ribbons floating, and balancing, with the keystone arch system, and the stones are embedded in dry gravel of the same material. So, I was just working with engineering, but discovering the ways to use local material inside the same economy. The second strategy is known materials and technologies have uses we have yet to discover. Experiment boldly. Okay, that's a strategy where it means that there's a lot, instead of just rethinking the material, you can also rethink the way to use ancient materials, timeless materials. There's so much scope to be ingenious with how those are put together. So one of the initial early experiments that I had done was because I had discovered potters who were struggling with maintaining their studios. Nobody was buying cooking pots that they made. So I wanted to divert those skills and let urbanization ensure their livelihood rather than steal their livelihood, or threaten them. So I tried to make insulated roofs with the catenary curve, not need formwork, because we used to have traditionally in this area tile roofs with wood supporting structures. And I managed, we tried to create, because the wood is not available anymore, there's hardly anything at any affordable price for our growing population. So this was an idea of solving several things: the climate, the labor, the support system to be done with it, and address the engineering and the economy. So a lot of those type of things would happen one-to-one on site, so that the craftsmen, because a lot of engineers did not want to calculate these kind of things for us. So I used to work with the craftsmen who had more confidence than doubts in their ways of working. So I wanted them to understand whatever engineering principles I knew, so that they could support me in realizing that. And so this is my own house. So I might as well say that, sorry. This is the wall house. And this is me 30 years ago, where I just started my practice, not knowing anything about what I'm going to do with that. But I just want to say that I realized one thing. I want to say this to the students, that, you should don't let what you do not know interfere with what you do know, because otherwise you'll never experiment, and you will never know everything, and then you will start applying it. You'll only know it if you start wanting to know it. And I was probably very naive when I started my practice. I didn't worry about insurances and all that. I think a youth has all these advantages that you don't get anxious about things. And we should really use this kind of attitude thing when you're young. So I discovered all these potters and all that. And, starting from there, we managed to produce this type of things. And we also didn't produce them in factories. These are produced compared to other, if terracotta products, if you look at the LEED rating system or whatever, they're going to tell you that anything fired is so much energy. They'll compare it with mud, but there is a difference with what you're firing it, So in all these catalogs and rating systems, I found there is only quantitative energy and not qualitative. I'm always arguing with all these kind of things, because it comes from a mindset of everything being standard. And I don't feel, if you check all the boxes and you win a platinum award, in my opinion, it's not more green than the things that did not get measured, So I started valuing common sense above everything, and the collective consciousness that is already there. So along with masons and craftsmen, we started just solving those problems and building, that kind of that kind of architecture. And this one, the walls of the wall house are also made by handmade. In the meantime, I discovered that there were pre-industrial bricks that were still being manufactured. They are the size like the old Roman bricks, very thin, 2.5 centimeters high, which you can just lift without effort and work like an artist, almost. And I realized that once you start doing a thing, your eyes open and you start seeing more and more, and you can't unsee that. And then I started applying those. And as I went along and befriended the potters community, I would get more and more ideas, such as I finally found another idea